Welcome, everyone, to another awesome episode of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. And if you tuned in last week, you know the exact topic we're going to discuss today, which is part 2 of our AOA Q&A deep dive. Now, we got through some of the questions. We have a bunch more today, and we have even more than we're probably going to have time to get to. Because again, this is a deep dive. We're going to actually spend our time talking about these, kind of really flushing out a lot of a little bit of plumbing humor there for you. I should say fleshing out the answers to some of these questions that our listeners have asked. So we're going to get right into our topic today after the interesting fishing fact Jesse has prepared for us.
So, the interesting fishing fact today is about something that you've probably smelled recently if you've been fishing down at one of the creeks. That's right. Not homeless people. Salmon! So, I have some interesting facts about fishing in Ontario for salmon because, as you may know, but you may not know, Chinook salmon were not always in Ontario. They're not an invasive species because we brought them here, but they're not a natural species of fish that have been in Ontario. So I thought, for those that don't know, I learned a bit myself too doing this research. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of the salmon that got introduced into the Great Lakes and the same fish that we're catching off the piers, we're catching in the creeks, a bunch of that information. So listen to this. So a little bit of, biology about these fish. So during a salmon run, we know the salmon go up the creek from the Lake Ontario. They don't actually go into the ocean. They live in Lake Ontario. And then probably like mid-August to October, they go up the creek and they dig shallow nests and they lay their eggs into that nest, or they call it a redd. Now, during this time, I'm going to have a question for Andrew. For female Chinook salmon, they guard their redd between how many days before dying? I did not know this, but it's actually a lot longer than I thought.
They guard the nest? Really?
Yes, apparently.
I didn't know. I would take a wager maybe a week.
Yep, so it says anywhere between 4 and 25 days. That seems a bit like, yeah. I don't know, because usually by the time salmon season closes above the river, I'm not up in the river in like October and seeing the same fish guarding. I've never seen a fish, I don't know, maybe I have, but guarding a nest. But apparently some of them do that. Maybe that's more like in British Columbia. Who knows? But anyway, it says they guard their nest between 4 and 25 days.
Maybe it's those smarter, native salmon when they're native to the area to kind of have those street smarts. But here, because they've been introduced, they lost some of their wisdom.
They're like, I don't know who I am. Abandon my child. Anyway, this is another interesting part. The eggs hatch after a total of how many days depending on water temperature? I did not know this either. I also never thought about this before in my life.
30 days?
90 to 150 days.
That's crazy long.
Yeah, so that's 3+ months. So you have to think, if these fish spawn in October, you have November, December, January. So they could hatch anywhere between January and then anytime in the spring. So that's how long it takes to hatch. Wow. Now, the average number of eggs that an average size Chinook salmon lays, how many would you guess? It's in the thousands.
Yeah, 10,000, I would say.
It's 5,000. Good guess, but cut it in half. It's like half of those guys down at the creek snagging the fish, cutting them in half. Don't do that. That's illegal. So, other interesting fact that these eggs, they're not all deposited into one nest or redd. They're deposited in several, which makes me think, if they're guarding their nest and they have several nests, are they just like swimming around like crazy, just being like, get out of here, get out of here? I don't know. I don't believe that. I don't know. Maybe this information off this sketchy website is wrong. It was like a biology website though, so I don't know. I am going to challenge
biology websites also talk about the real facts about Bigfoot. So you never know.
So anyway, this is the story of the Chinook salmon. So there is tons of Chinook salmon in the Great Lakes, and if, again, like I said, if you never really thought of it or you're young, you probably just think they've always been there. But that's not true. What was in Lake Ontario, Andrew, before Chinook salmon?
It was the Atlantic salmon. That was the only native salmonoid we had.
Now, what was some of the factors that led to Atlantic salmon basically going extinct?
One factor. Overfishing, commercial fishing. They used to sell them by the barrel load back in the day. I think the last native one that was ever caught was like shortly into the 1900s. Like they were pretty much extinct by the late 1800s almost.
Yeah, they were well overfished, super unsustainable fishing practices. I remember reading some information about Duffin's Creek in Ajax, which is a very amazing creek, had a lot of salmon. Back in the day, in the 1800s sometime, they used to count the amount of salmon going up the creek by saying how many barrels worth of salmon. Like they were so thick in there of Atlantic salmon. Now you're rare to see very few. So basically people overfished them. Again, back in the olden days, they didn't know a lot about, fishing ethics or the sustainability of like native species and stuff like that. So I mean, like, I'm not going to say you can't blame them because, they couldn't have been that dumb, but mistakes were made. Let's just say that. That's your great great grandfather's fault. Thanks, man. So unsustainable fishing practices. There was a lot of alterations to river courses where they would just completely divert rivers and stuff, and the fish couldn't get up, and basically they couldn't spawn, and that doomed them. And I don't think salmon would just be like, "Oh, this river's done. I'm just going to go up another one." Maybe they do that. I know there has been fish that have gone up random rivers to spawn, but the mass majority of them probably just like were like, "Well, I guess I'm doomed." That's what I tell people when I say I'm not going to have kids. The bloodline dies with me.
Well, you think of a river if it gets cut off, right? Or a dam or something is put in place or a big mill.
Yep.
They will keep trying. They still smell the same stuff coming down current. So they're going to be trying to go up there. Just now they hit a wall and they can't get to effective breeding grounds.
Exactly.
So they might spawn down in the bottom, or they may never spawn because they know they're not in the right spot, but it will not be productive.
Exactly. So alterations to the river courses, the blocking of migratory passages, like putting up dams. A lot of dams were put up so these fish couldn't get up. Habit loss, and basically they became pretty much extinct, like Andrew said. Now, they were the top predator in Lake Ontario, and I'm sure there was like sturgeon and stuff, but like generally the salmon were the top predator. So once they were pretty much extinct, there was also lake trout in Lake Ontario, but not huge numbers of them. So now the interesting thing is, as far back as the 1870s, there was a huge bump of the invasive alewife population. So they were around for quite a while, but the Atlantic salmon were eating them. So it kind of kept the numbers in check. So in the 1870s, basically, they realized that there's not a lot of salmon left, and there are tons of these alewives everywhere. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen an alewife die-off, Andrew. Have you ever seen that?
I have seen. I mean, it may not have been a major one, but the ones I've seen, it's pretty shocking how many there are.
Yeah, and that's now. So back in the olden days, it said that alewives, they got into the Great Lake ecosystem, and their numbers exceeding the carrying capacity of the Great Lakes, and they underwent massive die-offs that littered miles of shorelines and hundreds of public beaches in Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, and Lake Ontario. So basically what happened was people got mad. The public were like, there's like literally millions of these dead, rotting, dying fish. Like the seagulls can only eat so much. The seagulls must have been super fat those years, but they were rotting and everywhere. Remember that huge carp die-off? Like maybe 15, 20 years ago?
Yep.
We were on Lake Simcoe and we went to go swimming at the beach, and there was rotting dead carp everywhere, just on the shoreline. So imagine that, but with alewife. And alewife, if you didn't know, their minnows about, I'd say, 3 to 4 inches long.
About
They're
the size of your casting spoon for salmon.
Yeah, exactly, right? So what happened? People were like, hey, these things smell. They're everywhere. This is disgusting. So you know what they thought instantly? We need to find something that eats those. So that is one of the reasons. It's not the only reason, but that is one of the reasons that they introduced Chinook salmon into Lake Ontario. Now, an interesting thing that I didn't know is oftentimes we think that salmon, people are like, oh, they just go up there and die and they're not really naturally reproducing. That's not true. How much stocking of salmon do they do now in Lake Ontario? It's actually not that much. Now, if you think of Lake Michigan,
for Chinook that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I haven't really looked into that exact, research, so I'm not going to say anything about that because I don't know. But Lake Michigan, for example, that is like probably one of the best Great Lakes for like, they stock browns, they stock coho, they stock Chinook, they stock trout, and it is a world-class fishery because they have all these fish that they've stocked, and they're literally put there for sport fishing and for eating. They're put there for people to catch. Lake Ontario, not so much. But people oftentimes think that in Lake Ontario that these salmon, they're basically like, they're they don't really reproduce, and the fish are born. They're like, oh, they just spawn and that's what happens. It's like, well, where do you think they come from? So there is some stocking, obviously, but it said, this is what a biologist named Brian Widdell said. He's a fisheries research biologist in the USA for the Geological Survey of Great Lakes Science Center in New York City. Now, he says that at least 50% of the Chinook in Lake Ontario are naturally reproduced. So obviously they must do some stocking. Obviously, if it was only 50% every year, they pretty much die off. But 50% of them successfully spawn, lay their eggs, they hatch, and they eventually make it back to Lake Ontario. So that's a way higher number than I thought. I never really thought about this subject, but that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, like I may be way off, but I think I was hearing when it's actually I was listening to Angelo Viola kind of go on one of his rants about the stocking of salmon in the Great Lakes. But I think they were mentioning that when you were talking with someone about it, who was a biology's like resource manager or whoever, I think they were saying that Ontario hasn't stocked Lake Ontario with Chinook in a while. The states are still doing it, but I don't think. Now I may be wrong, but I thought I heard that Ontario itself, Canada side, haven't done any restocking in recent years for the Chinook species.
Hey, we share the lake, so if they stock them over there and we get some of them, we're not complaining. You know, they've been stocking Atlantic salmon too, and I know that's a big issue too, because generally speaking, the water isn't as clean as Atlantic salmon need to become a successful species anymore, from what I understand. So a lot of people think it's a waste of time. Other people are all for it. I don't really have an opinion on the matter, but it is nice to see some of them in the creeks now. You see every fall someone catch one. I actually caught one a few years ago, a nice one. And
when we
of
were
all
trolling,
my years,
we caught 2 on that day. When we were like trolling for when my boss took us out fishing that one day.
Oh, nice.
We were trolling. We caught 2. Like we caught one of each salmon species that are in the lake, like everything from trout to salmon. But yeah, we caught 2 Atlantics on just our boat.
Yeah, they're really cool fish. Like I wish that the water was clean enough to get those fish back, because when I hooked that Atlantic, I was float fishing for steelhead, and I saw a few fish in the riffles, and I had my float going down. I was just using like, I think it was a spawn bag or a pink worm, something like that. I don't know. It was like November, and I was drifting down. My float shot under, set the hook, thing started fighting like crazy, and I thought it was a rainbow. I was like, oh, sick, like a steelhead. It was nice. Comes up, it's a nice, like, you know, I'd say like 27, 28 inch Atlantic. It was a big one, big male hook jaw. Got it in the net. I was like, it is probably one of the most impressive fish that I've ever caught. They're so muscular. They fight totally different than a Chinook. They're more like airborne and crazy. It was pretty cool. So anyway, that was the interesting fishing fact. If you didn't know, Atlantic salmon were supposed to be here, and then we were dumb and we did bad things, and now we have the big dirty Chinook. So you may be happy, you may be sad, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's that is good. I always like learning about more of the history, and I actually have some topics that in the future that I'm going to be doing for interesting fishing facts and whatnot, and are a bit more historical. But I love learning more and more about that stuff. It's cool. And I wonder if the fact that Atlantics aren't very popular right now in our lake is why they're so special to us now.
Yes. Well, they call them the unicorn, right?
Yeah.
People are like, oh, I caught a unicorn.
Imagine if we were around the time when they just started introducing Chinook, and we're like, they're very rare. Maybe we'd like them more.
Yeah, pretty much.
Perfect. Well, we want to give a big thanks to everyone who was able to write in the questions for us for this Q&A. We're going to launch right into that. And the first one we're going to jump back in on is from Zach Goes Fishing on Instagram. And he asks, if you had to pick one rod company and one lure company for the rest of your life, which would it be? Now, the rod company, I would have to say St. Croix. That'd be my choice.
Yeah.
But I'll let Jesse answer his too, because I have to take a bit more time to think about the lure. Because I like using a variety of things.
Yeah, that's a hard one. Rods, not so much, because I mean, if you pick any large, like a manufacturer has a large line of rods, like St. Croix, they make literally everything. They make surf rods, they make musky rods, they make panfish rods. You're set. Like, you know, if you pick like a brand like, say, like Fenwick, they also make everything, like inshore rods. Like, you're set. But lures, that's a little bit harder. But I just wrote down a list though of all the rod manufacturers that I've bought over the years. I own probably a dozen St. Croix. I'm a huge St. Croix guy. I got Andrew into it. Actually, he got me into it. Then I just took over. Mega Bass makes really nice stuff. A lot of their high-end stuff is super bougie, and I don't have it because I'm poor. Shimano,
I grew
great
up
rods.
using Shimano,
We
and
grew
I
up-
still do. Like I love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We grew up using Shimano, and like honestly, I still use a lot of Shimano reels. As for the rods, the last Shimano rod I bought was one of the new Corrado rods, which is a fantastic rod.
Mhm.
It's just they're price point rods that I normally buy. I've liked other things in the price point, so I just haven't bought a Shimano rod in a long time, but they make fantastic stuff. G Loomis, I've owned a few of those. Fantastic rods. Still own a few. Okuma, super underrated. I have a few Okuma rods. Like they make a lot of like trolling stuff, but their bass rods are very underrated rods. They're super crisp, they're super sensitive, they got really good actions, and they're reasonably priced. Fenwick, we have a few. Like Andrew has one of his regular medium heavies is a Fenwick.
I'll say this: all of the Fenwicks I own are secondhand from Jesse.
Yeah. So when I worked at Sale back in the day, the discounts on Fenwick was way higher than anything else. Because I mean, like they're mass-produced rods in China. They're not. It's not like you're buying like St. Croix, right? But they make good rods, and the discounts were fantastic for employees. So I used to buy like salmon season. I'd buy like 3 salmon casting rods. There's like short casting rods, right? And then I'd have one, break one, give one to Andrew. So yeah, they're great rods. And honestly, I think Fenwick, their new rods seem very nice. They just seem like they would just bumped up in price a little bit, that I'd probably pick other rods over them, but that's just me saying that. Ugly Stick, I'm sure most of us have owned an Ugly Stick. They make great rods. I probably wouldn't want to just buy those because they don't have a huge selection of lightweight rods, but they do make everything though. They make surf rods, steelhead rods, everything. I've owned a few Streamside rods. They make mostly like steelhead and salmon stuff. Not bad stuff. 13 Fishing. I think we have a few ice fishing rods too from 13, and they're fantastic. Super underrated.
The Widowmaker is a really nice ice fishing rod.
I have 3 of those. They're so nice. And they always go on sale. Here's the thing.
Yes.
13 Fishing rods, fantastic rods. You go like at the end of the year when they're like redesigning next year's models, you can get them for like 50% off. And like,
or more.
Sometimes like
you get
60,
them, it's
70,
70% off. It's like, oh man, that's awesome.
You go to Gagnon Sports and you look at some of the racks, it'd be like, oh, these 13 fishing rods are like $150 regularly, and they're like $60. Like, might as well buy 3. I wouldn't want to miss out on the value. Berkeley, I remember when I was first starting out with my bait, one of my first bait casting rods was a Berkeley Lightning rod. Remember those?
Yes.
I think they were like 40, $50. Yep. Daiwa, like Andrew said, huge fan of Daiwa. They make a lot of nice stuff, mostly like bass and walleye stuff. Oh yeah, he's wearing a Daiwa hat, sure.
And shirt, yeah.
And then Daiwa, I think they're kind of in connection with Evergreen. I have a few Evergreen rods. They're really nice. More like Japanese, like, JDM style rods. And then Bass Pro Shops, like we grew up fishing
the old
some
Tourney
of our
special.
the Tourney Special or the Graphite series. So I mean, like, my choice obviously is going to be St. Croix. My next choice after that is going to be Daiwa. I just find price point wise, I know we sound like Daiwa fanboys. We're huge Daiwa fans. We bought a lot of Daiwa stuff over the years. And I just find for the price point, a lot of companies are really stepping up in the budget department. Rods under $200 are just like way better than they've ever been. And they look nice. They look like they're $200-$300 rods, and they're $150. Like the Daiwa rods, like the XT, the Tatula XT, $120. Fantastic.
The new walleye rods.
Oh,
they
look
look awesome. And
they
honestly,
look classy.
I pick it up and I think I'm like, this isn't a $200 rod. Like,
yeah, $130?
Yeah, it's not much more than the Canadian Custom.
And
like,
the Canadian Custom,
it's nice, like smooth green. Canadian Custom is another awesome. I love using those.
Yeah, and so Daiwa for me, if I had to spend under a certain amount, like I honestly think the Daiwa rods that are like 150 or less, they're nicer than the low end St. Croix rods, if that makes sense. So if I'm going to spend $150, I'm not going to get St. Croix. I'd probably get a Daiwa. They seem like they're just higher performance, more sensitive, a little more crisp. That's just my opinion of owning probably 30 different rods. But anyway,
I do have another rod company that I've owned that I know Jesse has never owned one of this brand.
Is it like 80 years old?
No. It's well, I do have a Head rod and reel, but I bought my first bait casting combo was a Browning.
Oh yeah, Bass Pro Shops Browning.
It was trash.
Yeah,
I will say it was like a $60 combo for the rod and the reel. and it wasn't so much the rod. It was a heavy rod. Yeah, nothing fancy about it, but that reel did not cast like anything less than a half ounce.
Bait casters have come a long way, even budget ones.
Oh yeah.
Oh, another rod company, Raven. But they
Yeah.
mostly just make salmon still stuff. I have a bunch of Raven rods. They're nice. But yeah, so St. Croix and Daiwa, I'd say that for both of us, that's our answer for that. What about for lures? That's a hard one. One lure company.
Like that's so. What is he classifying as lures? Because I like using spinners and stuff like that, but I don't want to use only spinners. And if
I'm going to make it hard on you.
Spinners.
One brand. One brand. That's it. I'm going to tell you, as much as I hate to say this, Berkeley.
They do a lot. Yeah.
Berkeley owns like half the brands out there. So, I mean, you got spinner baits, you got chatter baits, a whole line of plastic baits. You know, they make topwater frogs. They make almost everything. They have some like bigger like glide baits and stuff. Like they make a little bit of everything. It's a hard choice to just buy one company. I have to go the same because like I love Rapala. I like a lot of Rapala baits. They're great, but I don't want to only have jerk baits, a couple walking baits, and crankbaits. You know, where's a bladed jig? Where's a spinner? Where's a spoon? Where's any of that stuff that I just can't get from Rapala? Yeah, because Rapala owns like all these other companies. Like they own VMC, they own Terminator, like all those companies. So like your spinner baits are sold through Terminator. Like Berkeley, on the other hand, they kind of just sell everything themselves. Although they own a bunch of companies too. Like Pure Fishing owns like everything.
Yeah. So if it was just hard baits, like if we cut out other things, or okay, like what brand of hard like crankbaits, jerk baits, kind of that kind of minnow style?
Probably Rapala.
Either Rapala or Evergreen has a lot of real cool stuff.
They do, but it's not a huge lineup. You know what I mean?
No, but I find I've been throwing a lot more of either Evergreen or Jackal. Like I know it's not as big of a range. I would probably end up going with Rapala again, just because it's the biggest company out there, the most versatility to use.
Yeah.
But if I wanted to get like special about it, I would probably say either Evergreen or Jackal, just because a few of those baits are some of my like biggest confidence baits.
I think we covered that pretty good. We actually have a lot of questions, so we're gonna go in depth, but we're gonna kind of go fast in depth.
And our next one there is from Ben Strawn. You get to master one fishing skill to the point you don't ever need to think about it. The task is effortlessly done correctly every time. What's your pick?
Skipping. 100%. 100%. If you could skip like a wizard, like some of these guys you see, like for instance, like Yak and Bassin, that guy on Instagram, the guy skips like a wizard for sure. It's like right underneath the dock with 1 inch of clearance. If I could do that, put my lure anywhere I want exactly, perfectly every single time, you're going to put your bait where no other guy gets to.
Yeah, because pitching, okay, that's great, like, but you can be inaccurate while pitching, and the worst that's going to happen is you get some weeds on your lure, or you hit the guy's dock. Like with skipping, you avoid it, going under into a bunch of branches of a tree. Like, skipping that was an easy one. No need for deep dive. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
Angling Addict from Instagram asks, have you guys ever used spike it dyes and scents? And if so, when do you find yourself pulling it out and using it? Now, first of all, for anyone who doesn't know what he's talking about, spike it dyes, they're for dipping your soft plastics and stuff in, and you can get different colors of it. So let's say you have Jesse's favorite, green pumpkin, craw trailer or something like that. But then you want a little something different that day, and you get this chartreuse spike it, and you just dip the claws of that in there. Now the claws are fluttering with this big chartreuse like flash. Like that's what it's for. You can recolor your soft plastics and kind of put cool tips on it.
And it's scented too. So I mean, you get the added bonus of the scent.
The odor and the visual it can increase. I personally have never used it myself. I have used scents and stuff like that, but I've never used it.
Yeah, I had one bottle and I used it for maybe a year, and then it tipped over. Yeah, it tipped over and I lost half of it, and then I never got another one. But I thought we could just talk a little bit about scents and spike it, like adding some dip of a color in general, because this is a good topic. So we're going to go through some of these points, the pros of using something like spike it, or even scents, but using something for spike it. So one of the pros of using that would be increased visibility. So I know we always talk about lures that like green pumpkin. Oh, the green pumpkin, flipping bait or a chatterbait. And it's kind of really the color of everything in the water, like the weeds and the logs. It's such a natural thing. Now, fish generally don't have any problem zoning in on a chatterbait because it's in the water. Like they can feel it. They don't have to necessarily see it. You can catch bass in the middle of the night on a black lure. Like they just come in and see it. But something like spike it actually helps your bait be more visible. So say you're using something like a flippin' bait that isn't really making a lot of noise or vibration or flash in the water. Something that blends in may be good when the fish are being a little picky. But if they're being aggressive and you just want to help the fish find the bait better, you put some high visibility, like the spike it paint basically on your bait. It's oftentimes like chartreuse or like neon orange, something that's bright. I think personally that it helps catch the fish's attention a little better. Like some of my favorite plastic baits, like I know Jeff at Limestone Lures, he makes a really good stick bait. It's a 5-inch stick bait and it's green pumpkin. And in the tip, it's a classic color, like at the tip is chartreuse. And just that little extra bit of color, I just feel like it just helps it stand out slightly better. But at the same time, it's still very natural, but that little bit of color just helps it stand out. So I think that's one of the pros. And the second one I'll cover quick is scent. So like Spike It has scent in it. Like I remember, Andrew, we had a bunch of different scents, right? Like
You remember the old Yum spray?
Yum crayfish
and
spray.
It was a crayfish spray.
And it
I tell you,
smelled good.
I cracked or broke or spilt about 3 different bottles of those in my tackle box, and it took years for that smell to dissipate.
I know like Berkeley makes that, Dr. Juice. There's all kinds of smelly jelly.
Like bait fuel and stuff like that. Like there's a lot around.
So that's a huge topic that a lot of people have an opinion on. We should actually do a whole episode on
that
using scents.
One.
Yeah.
That's great. All right, move on. No.
Well, I was going to say, like, I believe that generally speaking, say you're using a lure that causes a reaction strike, I don't really think scent is going to do much because you're causing a reaction strike. The fish is going to strike anyway. But if you're, one time that I use scent a lot is when I'm ice fishing. I have some smelly jelly because that lure, the water's gin clear. You have that lure just hanging in front of their face and they're just staring at it. I honestly feel like any little advantage I can get, if there's a little bit of scent and they're like, oh, okay, that thing looks cool, I'm kind of skeptical, but it smells good too. I feel like there is an advantage in that. And I know some people are very into scents. They're always spraying it on or they're putting bait fuel in their packages. And is that just something to give them confidence? Maybe. Does it hurt? Definitely not. Does it work? I think it does. But is it necessary? Maybe not. So to answer your question, we don't know.
I will say, of all the scents, I really miss garlic infused baits, and there's a few around still today. I know Blue Collar Angling, their stuff is like has a really nice like garlic smell.
It smells great. I love it.
It smells like you want to crack open a microwave lasagna and just sprinkle those on top. Like it's garlicky. But yeah, I really like the garlic smell. So the next one is from Robert. The best 3 pike lures for larger fish for the fall. What would you say?
That's a good question. I'd say you can't go wrong with a jerkbait any time of the year. I would just use a slightly bigger jerkbait. Like if you're looking at,
you can go to the saltwater size X wraps. Like those things are big, but you can still fish them on a heavy action bait cast or something like that.
I was going to say, speaking of X wraps, like one lure that I've done well in the fall with is the regular X wrap is like what, 4.5 inches?
Yeah, I think so.
The size up from that, but not the saltwater size, not the huge saltwater one. It's like 5.5 inches or 5 inches long, that X wrap. I think it weighs like an ounce.
I've got one of those in Fire Tiger, and I really like it.
I got one in gold, and I've caught some good pike on that. And it's not huge, but it's slightly bigger. So I'd say a big jerkbait, definitely for 1. For 2, I've done really well on big spinner baits. Like not a huge spinner bait, but I'm talking like a Blackfly Lures Big Bastard. It's like a 3/4 ounce spinner bait with a big blade on it. Attracts the fish. Pike are visual feeders, so I like baits that have bright colors, like Fire Tiger, like Andrew said, or like bright white. But black and orange is always good, right? But then you have a big, shiny blade flashing and thumping, and it really attracts the big pike. And
if you wanted it, you could do a big blade chatterbait, like the heaviest weight. You put a big blade chatterbait on, and you put a stinger hook on the backside, and put on like a big grub, like just a little bit bigger plastic, and it just improves the profile of it a lot. Yeah. And that big blade is not, undersized for something that's, for that size of profile anymore either. But that
you've done good on the big blade.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
definitely.
throughout
Like,
the whole year, like
yeah,
it works well, but
and it's
that
not
if
a
you
massive
wanted to
lure,
have that.
so you're
No.
not going to be tying yourself out. You just use it on your regular bass rod. And I'd say
Mhm.
like one of my top picks would probably be like a big 5 or 6 inch white swim bait on a jig hook.
You
Cast and
do good
retrieve.
on big tubes too
Yeah,
for pike.
actually, I
You were
just
doing
put in an
really good.
order with Water Wolf lures, right? So
Mhm.
this spring, I think it was last year at CanCast. It wasn't even this year. It was last year. We were talking to Mike at Water Wolf Lures at CanCast. We bought a few musty tubes. And then I was looking through, and he has this big 5 inch tube. It's not just a regular 5 inch, but it's thick too. And it's called the Tubezilla. And it's big. It's like it's literally for like jigging for lake trout through the ice.
Mhm.
It's a big tube. So I bought a pack, and I was like, these would be good for pike. And I didn't use them for like the whole year. And then me and Andrew went out pike fishing this spring on the Trent River, and it was a sunny day, and the fish were not going at all. And I put on this tube jig on a big jig head with a 7/0 hook, and it was like half ounce. And I was just kind of like ripping it along the weed line, and it would kind of spiral down. And then before it hit the
Mhm.
weeds, I'd kind of rip it up through the weeds. And I killed Andrew that day.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know. It was literally,
Yeah.
I was like, Andrew, tie one of these on. And I was like, oh, I only got the one. Sorry, pal. Sucker. But we caught some good fish that day. So yeah, I'd say like a big, slow falling plastic tube, swim bait, anything like that.
Mhm.
Or like we mentioned last week, Shadzilla Jr., those
Yep.
swim baits, those are great for muskie and pike. So yeah.
So I don't know what the best 3 of those are, but hey, choose 3 of those. You can't go wrong with any of them. We have Joe Jog H61. I know that's incorrect, but that's how I'm going to say it. And that's from Instagram. He asked, "What's your opinion on forward-facing sonar, and separately its inclusion in tournament fishing?" This is always a hot button topic, so we probably won't go crazy into this, but if I owned it, I would use it. If I could afford it, I would use it. If everyone is using it in tournaments, I don't see as anyone having an advantage. If people are saying, I don't want to use it because I don't think it's right, and you're the only guy that's not doing it and is upset because they're not winning tournaments, well, maybe try using it and learn how to use it well, and you could be competitive again. Like they say, like we talked about before with Sonar on that other podcast, they said the same thing about 2D sonar back in the day, and the states are trying to ban it because it was unfair a fishing advantage. Like, like they'll do it with any technology. So for me, I don't get all caught up in that. It's very cool. It can be very effective. I've been in a couple boats that have had it fishing with some guys, and I've seen the use that you can do with it. It's amazing. It's amazing.
I can see why people are against it. Again, you could do a whole podcast on this. Like every other YouTube and podcast, they go into like episodes about forward facing sonar because it's like the hot topic right now. Because one of the big fishing leagues in the States, they just ban live scope in their tournaments. Now, I also see that like Bassmaster, they basically were like, well, the new rule is you can only have one live scope on your boat, because some of the guys, even up here in Ontario, they'll have like multiple live scope units on their boat. It's like, I get it, but tell me you're rich without telling me you're rich. Like you have multiple live scopes so you can see basically all around your boat and stuff. It's like, okay, that's cool, but
the cheapest unit to be able to get like the unit and live scope all together is like $5,000 or something, isn't it?
I just looked it up. So for me, like say like I was getting live scope, I would probably get an ice bundle so that I could take it ice fishing, but as well I'd rig it up so I could use it in my boat too, and it's like $4,500. So again, it's not cheap. Is it worth it to you? Like again, it's always what the value is. Something like live scope.
Does that include a head unit though?
That the ice bundle includes everything.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, it's getting cheaper. That's still a lot of money for the average angler. If you're someone that's serious about fishing though, like it could be worth it to you, and you might be the kind of person that's like, I don't like looking at a screen the whole time. So I feel like there are pros and cons to it. Will it have vast environmental damages from making fishing too easy? Here's the thing. We fished in some boats. We fished with a guide this spring with live scope. It helps you find fish for sure. Doesn't help you necessarily catch fish. You still have to catch the fish. Now, the fact that it makes finding fish easier, obviously you're going to catch more fish because you're finding more fish. You're not just randomly fishing in areas that there aren't fish. So yeah, I can see the problem. If everyone had live scope, the fish, I think they would just adapt and then just become more difficult to catch. You know what I mean? So that's another topic, but I thought we could just go slightly into the pros and cons of live scope. So why don't you take the pros, Andrew, and then I'll take the cons.
Debate team. All right.
Debate. Who's going to win? In the left corner.
Inconclusive.
Yeah.
So I would say, pros for forward-facing sonar, real-time fish location. So unlike 2D when it's like, yep, there was a fish there. Now there is a fish right there, right now in front of you in your casting range. Efficiency, so you can locate fish, again, quicker. You're not having to pass over them, mark the spot, and come back. You can approach spot and then just look ahead of you and see if there's anything there, or even if you're looking for structure, you can find it. So without you motor into a bay, you just spin this thing in a 360. You know the exact direction of where that is, what you're seeing, and you can I want to cast at that. So it can eliminate a lot of, like you said, wasted time on the water. Targeting a specific fish, you could do that. Like you'll see videos and stuff online of guys fishing like a school of bass down in the States or a school of crappie, and or they're fishing like trout or something like that, and you'll see multiple fish coming out and like, oh, there's that big one, and they'll see some small ones. They'll just like rip the bait in and recast, and they're waiting to see that big blob start to move on screen. And like, all right, there we go, and then they go for that one that they want. Like it's cool, but again, it's kind of like video game fishing. But that is cool. You can actually target without having to cast and then potentially and hook a smaller fish, potentially spook the spot. You could actually target the one big one that you want from that little pile,
and hope it's not a beaver.
Yeah,
it's like, look at that one, it's huge. It's like 40 pounds.
Understanding fish behavior. Again,
that's huge.
If you're seeing the fish, how they're reacting, you can be like, I'm getting a bunch of follows. They're coming in, and then they're leaving. So what I'm going to do? Okay, next time I have a follow, I'm going to pause. Doesn't do anything. Next time I have a follow, I'm going to speed up, and you can see how they're reacting to how you're changing and what's going to actually trigger strikes. Because if you don't have that, you'll only see that if they've followed it to the boat, 10 feet from the boat, and then it may not be a real. You don't know if it's, was I moving the bait wrong, or did you see the boat and that's why he left? So you can actually get some good intel on how you're fishing and how the fish are responding.
And to add to that, I remember listening to a podcast. They were talking about forward-facing sonar, and they're like, it could possibly make fishing easier, but they were saying that forward-facing sonar actually showed a lot of these anglers how little we actually know about bass behavior.
Mm-hmm.
All these things that they're like, remember back in the day, they're like, there's no bass offshore, and they're like, yeah, there's a lot of bass, because they didn't have the technology to see them, like with like 2D sonar at the time. So this new technology, yes, like I'm not all for like all this newfangled technology. Like, it's nice to go to a new body of water and be like, hey, I can find weed lines, I can find fish. But at the same time, it kind of takes the mystery out of it, like the fun. But that's just me.
And the one last one for the pro column is fishing in deeper or unfamiliar waters. So again, if you don't know what you're fishing, this can help you, again, just narrow down more than your traditional graphs will take you. Okay, there's a point over here, there's a big shoal here, there's a big hole over here. That's great. When you have the live scope, you can pan around and say, oh, there's a rock that juts up right there. Or, oh, there's, it's a slightly drop or sharp off, and there's an overhang over top of that, which you just don't see with traditional 2D. So stuff like that, it's very useful to be able to find the spot on the spot.
Yeah. And I would say
see fish themselves.
Oh, yeah. And here's the thing. You don't always see fish on live scope. So like, again, I fish with a bunch of people with live scope, and oftentimes you're finding fishing spots, not necessarily fish. Like, we'll be musky fishing and we'll use live scope to find this big weed edge that would be hard to find with 2D, because then you'd have to drive over it and blah, blah, blah. So it was cool to find like weed lines. Like, we never saw a muskie on the live scope, but we found weed lines where we caught the muskie.
Yeah. When I was fishing with Brad Scott in that tournament, we found one technique that started working for us a little bit, was finding these big kind of cabbage towers that are coming up almost like little kelp forests, just random little clumps, maybe 3 feet across only, and they would come up almost to the surface of the water, but not to the surface. You couldn't see them visually oftentimes. Yeah. And so he would we'd take the live scope, look around the boat, and see, oh, there's a big stand of weeds over there. We just go and cast that. You wouldn't see any fish on it. You wouldn't see the fish come off of it with a live scope. But we were catching fish off of those weed towers. And the only way we were finding them is with the live scope. If I was on my boat, I would have just driven right by. There's nothing visual for me to see.
Yeah. No, for sure. Like, it does help. Now, again, a lot of people are against that. They're like, it's making fishing too easy. And a lot of guys, I'll say, a lot of old timers get mad. They're like, oh, new technology. They're like, you can learn to find fish the way I did back in the day, blah, blah. It's like, I don't want to sound like a weirdo, but I work full time. When I have possibly the day when I can go out fishing, like I don't have months or years to learn a lake. If I can go out fishing and I have
can't
a tool,
afford to buy a house on a lake.
Yeah. Yeah, but like we don't have like anything that helps speed up your learning generally is a pro. I hate when old timers are like, well, I had to put in the work back in my day and I spent years learning this lake. That's cool. But if you had this technology back in the day, don't tell me you wouldn't use it. Like, come on. Like those old guys have 2D sonar. The guys before them were probably like, you're cheating by knowing the depth. So
and it doesn't eliminate the need for experience and time in the water. That is necessary for you to become a better fisherman regardless.
Yeah.
All this is doing is eliminating the amount of time that would be wasted. Or not wasted, like eliminating the amount of time that will not be enhancing your abilities because you're not actively catching fish or actively learning during that time.
Yeah. And again, I see both sides. I totally understand it is so-called quote unquote, it's not cheating because there's no rules in fishing. You can't be like, that's cheating. It's like, oh, I wasn't aware that in the Ontario fishing regulations, there was a bunch of rules where say I can't use the technology, right? But quote unquote cheating.
Like dynamite.
Yeah.
Oh wait, they have a rule about that. Never mind.
I used to be completely against LiveScope until I actually used it.
Yeah.
And then I was like, okay, this is cool. It's not as crazy as everyone thinks. People think that, oh, you turn on your LiveScope and the fish are just jumping in the boat. No, in fact, I found one of the cons, I'll say the first con is, it is annoying. I will tell you, you see fish that will not bite anything. If you had 2D sonar or you didn't have sonar at all, you wouldn't know. You'd be like, oh, there's nothing biting here. But when you see a huge walleye, a school of walleyes, but you see a big walleye on LiveScope, and you have a jig head just fluttering over its head and it looks up and it goes up to eat it and it goes back down and you can't get it to bite like for an hour. That's more annoying than anything. So let's go into the cons. We kind of talked about the cons. Number one, the price. The price is usually the hardest part to swallow. And I know a lot of people were like, it's not that expensive. It's like, cool, you got a bass boat. Yeah, spending $5,000 on LiveScope probably isn't expensive. You can probably afford it. But for the average angler in this economy, especially like millennials, spending $5,000 on some electronics for your boat, if you happen to have a boat, it's a lot of money. So that could be a thing for sure. And again, like we mentioned, the ice bundle is like $5,000. Now, I'm not going to say that I will never own LiveScope. One day I hope to get it. It's not a huge thing on me right now. Like, hey, I fish in a canoe. I don't want to buy a LiveScope that costs more than my whole setup with the motor. So that's in the future, but it isn't cheap. But let's be serious. It is, for what it is, yes, it's expensive, but it is something that I'd say if you fish a lot and you're a serious angler, it could be worth it to you. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the cons is the potential to over rely on technology. So like we kind of said, it is a bit of not cheating, but it does definitely speed along the process. Like people that maybe did not know how to catch bass at all of a sudden they can find offshore bass and just smash them, right? So it definitely, people that had to learn how to do it the old way, I can see why they're mad, because they're like, I had to put in the time to learn to find these fish and these guys just go out and find them. Mm-hmm. Fish will adapt though, I think. But if you're just literally using LiveScope all day and that's all you do, I feel like that's a bad use of it. I feel like it's a tool that you should use depending on the situation. You shouldn't just be like staring at the screen all day to catch fish. Why don't you handle the next one, the distraction one?
So if you're using LiveScope, you're constantly watching the sonar screen, and I can attest to that. If it's there and I have the accessibility and I can, especially if I'm the one controlling it and I'm casting my bait, I cast out, my head goes down, and I watch my bait come in. I was like, this is cool. And part of it's because it's new, right? It's like, oh, I've never done this before. But some guys, they'll overly focus on the screen. And for me, a lot of the enjoyment I get while fishing is to actually be out on the water, to see and hear the birds chirping. We've talked before, Jesse and I, we don't have music playing on our boat and stuff like that. We talk to each other, but if we make any music, it's the sound of like loons and us hooting and hollering because we hopefully caught fish. Like that's the noises that we make.
Usually you just hear, oh man, I wish I had a LiveScope.
But yeah, if it was something where you're like, oh, I want to get away from it all, and I go onto the boat and I'm just like staring at another screen that's just smaller and closer to my face than my TV is, it's like, what am I doing here as much, you know? Yeah, it kind of can take away some of that special nature time.
I feel like though, like places where, again, like people said, should it be used in tournaments? I don't know. Like I remember watching tournaments back before LiveScope was a thing, and it was cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then watching, tournaments now with LiveScope, it's like everyone's just standing at the front of their boat staring at their screen. I don't care because I don't really watch a lot of professional fishing. I don't really care about professional fishing. I'm an average angler. I don't really care who wins the Bassmaster, all that stuff. It doesn't really interest me at all. But I feel like they should be held at a higher level for their skills. If they couldn't use LiveScope, the guys that are killing it now with LiveScope, they'll kill it without LiveScope. They always have. They're just good anglers. But I feel like people like guides that have to get clients on fish, or just weekend anglers who want to, like we said, not waste their time fishing fishless water. I think that is a good use for LiveScope.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're someone that's just going out and using LiveScope to keep every fish that you catch, and you have like 10 people in the boat, that's bad because you're just going to overharvest. Like I can see that for sure.
Absolutely.
So definitely there is, environmental concerns to it. But like we said, would we get LiveScope? Sure, we would. In the future, maybe one day, it would be great. I always say to Andrew, when we go up like north to like some of these like big deep lakes and the backcountry lakes, I'm like, dude, it would be sick to have LiveScope here. Like absolutely sick, because there's like nothing out there. It's like you could just see the big pike swimming around, It takes some of the mystery away, but it is fun. Like here's old people are like, oh, you guys just staring at your screen. It's like, yeah, but we grew up doing that. Like that's our generation. Like, I know some people are like, I'd go away to go fishing to enjoy nature. It's like, I do too, but I also go out to catch fish. So if I can have some advantage, if I'm on my deathbed, I'm not going to be like, I should never have got LiveScope and caught all those fish. That's my regret in life. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to be like, I caught a lot of fish. Some people are mad because I use LiveScope. Don't care.
Hey there, nurse lady. You see a 7-pounder I once caught?
Yeah. And I feel like there is kind of a negative thing about it because it's such a hot topic. I've talked to a few people that have LiveScope and they don't tell anyone. They don't show it on Instagram. And they're like, oh yeah, I got LiveScope. I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, I don't really tell anyone because people think you're just like selling out and cheating. I'm like, who cares? You're catching fish. That's great. That's what it's all. It's all about catching fish. As long as you use it responsibly, all technology, like Spider-Man, like you have to use your power for good, not evil.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. I was mixing up Star Wars and legit Spider-Man. Spider Wars.
I was trying to do a Yoda. I'm trying to think of a Yoda quote, but I won't even try. Let's just move on. Angelo from Instagram. He asks, what is a good time frame to fish a spot before deciding to go to another area? For me, what I would recommend is...
Just kidding. There's no actual time. Imagine that. It's exactly 14 minutes.
It's however long it takes to effectively fish that spot with as much information as you have. So let's say if you've been fishing all day and you know what, the bite is really hot today on crankbaits, and you go and fish a spot crankbaits and nothing's there with crankbaits, why would you then, I want to stay at this spot, I know I didn't catch anything, but I'm going to try all the other techniques again. Crankbaits are working that day. Go to another spot, fish crankbaits. But if you haven't caught any fish today, you're trying to find the pattern. Stay at your most promising spot to start with, or a good spot, and I would say fish it for as long as it takes to try a variety of techniques. Kind of fish out that spot and see, am I getting any action? What can I change? And then maybe try another area completely. If you tried all the techniques in a spot that looks good, find another spot that's maybe different. Try those same techniques there. Once you find it's working, then you can kind of reduce the amount of time you're going to spend on each spot the rest of the day. That'd be my recommendation.
Yeah. And I would say, like, to put it more in a stream fishing perspective, because that's what I grew up doing, is there's not a lot of good spots on the creek. There's like a bunch of pools that are like stellar. If you get that spot, you're like, yes, I got this spot. There's fish in it, even if you can't see them. And what I do is, if I'm drifting through that spot and I don't catch anything, first thing I'm going to do is, say I'm fishing a bead, I'm going to switch my presentation. I'm like, okay, maybe they're not into that. I'm going to put on a pink worm, or I'm going to put on a fly. I'm going to switch my presentation a few times. If that doesn't work, I'm going to go finesse. I'm going to be like Andrew. I'm going to be like, I have to find the smallest thing in my box and put it on. And then I'm going to go
6-inch swim bait.
So I'm using 6-pound fluoro leader. I might go down to 4. I'm going to go finesse. I'm going to go small. And another thing you can do is, this isn't really so much as stream fishing, but slow down or speed up. If you know there's fish in a spot, you may have to put on a bait that causes a reaction strike. So if you're not catching fish on like easy baits, like say like a stick bait or something like that, or a top water, you may have to cause them to react. We did a whole episode called the Reaction Attraction. It was actually one of our best episodes, I think, in the last 2 months. And it talked all about making fish bite a bait. You may have to switch to that. So put on a bait that causes a reaction and you'll probably catch fish. And if you do all that and nothing else works, then you go to the next spot.
So that's exactly all I had kind of thought on the subject too. Next up, I catch dinks. What's your all-time favorite rod or reel? For me, the rod, I'd have to say I do have a favorite rod of all time, and it is my first generation Mojo Bass. I got a 6.6 medium, and it's I love that was my first like good combo that I actually spent good money on, and I caught so many good fish on that rod.
Still great
still
rod.
have, and I paired that with my Shimano Stella at the time, or not
Stella,
Shimano
big
Stratic.
spender.
the white Shimano Stratic.
Yeah.
Again, that reel is probably like that still operates extremely well. It's a bulletproof reel, so I would say that's mine purely because it has a lot of nostalgia
History.
for me as being like
Yeah.
like in history. That was like the first good combo, and it's still kicking because I put the money into getting something that was good, you know?
Yeah. And that just goes to show you spend good money on good quality stuff and it lasts. I won't go into rods because I have a lot of my favorite rods. It's hard to choose, but I'll go into my reel. This is my favorite reel. I wanted one of these since I was 12 years old and could never afford one. And eventually I saved up and I bought this. And this, you'll notice that we use left-handed bait casting reels, even though we're right-handed. This is back when I bought right-handed reels before I got smart and bought lefties. But this is a classic. This is the Shimano Calcutta. This is one of the old heavy-duty, hardcore, made-in-Japan Shimano reels. This is the GTB. So it's Calcutta 200, but it's the one with the ported spool and it has 7 or 8 bearings instead of 3. Just a workhorse. Heavy, but it's a round reel. It's one of the gold Shimano reels.
Mm-hmm.
These are classic. They still make them, I think. But I always wanted one of those, and I wish this was a left-handed reel because I would use this all the time. I caught my PB walleye on this. It's called like a 9.5 pound walleye on this. Tons of really good, fun. Like Andrew said, like lots of history on this reel. I used to use this all the time. This is my first really good bait casting reel.
I remember when Jesse got that, and he was like, "This is why bait casters are good. It's like a winch. You can just reel things in."
Yeah. This was the first good one I had. And yeah, a lot of good memories on it. And I don't use it anymore. It just sits on my shelf. I've had many people try to buy it off me and stuff. But I'm like, no, I'm going to keep it because it just has a lot of good memories. But round reels, they're just heavy. They're big. It's low profile all the way for me now, but it's a great reel. And again, Shimano, good quality. One of the old made in Japan ones. They don't make them like they used to.
Then we have the Haas Kicker opinion. Panfish don't get the love they deserve as it comes to fishing and catch and cook.
I agree with that.
I agree. Yeah. We have the stuff like bluegill and pumpkin seed, and I absolutely love going to ponds and fishing for those things. Like I would spend an afternoon. I'm just like, I'm gonna try and break the 7-inch length on these things, and it's fun. It's a blast. And when you catch big panfish, especially things like perch, rock bass at the cottage this year, I caught a rock bass that was well over a pound again. Like those things are delicious. So catching and cook, they fillet very easily. You can get some choice little fillets off them. You can do a quick job on it, and if you get a few of them, it's some real nice, sweet, tender fish.
Yeah, and I definitely say like perch and crappie, they're eaten. Like I wouldn't say they're underrated because a lot of people eat those, but sunfish themselves are super underrated for eating. So like I went out a few months ago and we filled a bucket full of sunfish, me and my nephew. And we kept the big ones. They were bigger ones, like 7-8 inches if we could get them that big. And I filleted them up, super easy to fillet. Some people just cut the heads off, gut them, and they cook them whole.
Mm-hmm.
Like they scale them. And you get all the meat off that way. But I just filleted them up, had these nice little fillets. I battered them. We fried them up. And it was delicious. So, definitely underrated. Most people would be annoyed to fillet up 30 little sunfish. We didn't keep 30. We kept 10. But it was a good little fish fry. And it's fun to catch them. My nephew, he's 10 or 12, something like that. He's having fun catching them. And I was having fun catching them too. It's absolutely fun, especially on an ultralight rod and 4-pound line. Super fun.
We have Super Noof 71. The big great pink debate. Pink Senkos. Why it works so good. Now, I know like Jesse is one, he's like, oh, yes, the big pink Senko. Like he's the one who fishes that. I'm more partial to some other colors. So I'm going to let Jesse kind of take his reasoning on why because he's the one who always claims this. So he's going to now defend his statements and explain why does the pink Senko work.
Well, a little bit of a backstory here. So me and Andrew used to go to the cottage when we were kids and fish his cottage river. And we used to go through phases where we'd use one certain bait because we were just getting, like seriously into fishing at the time. So like one year is like, oh, we're using spinner baits, and we'd buy spinner baits and go catch fish on them. And then the next year would be a different lure, and we kind of like tried new techniques every year. One year, I bought a pack of pink. What was it?
I just want to say, because we're kids, and this is our reasoning at the time is, I'm gonna throw a Williams. My brother's gonna throw a spinner. Jesse's gonna throw a spinner bait. And then as soon as one of us catches a fish, we'd all start throwing that same bait. And we're like, oh, they were hitting this year was, insert bait name here.
Yeah. That poor fish just happened to see that lure first. Yeah. But anyway, it was fun. So I think one year I bought a pack of Yum twister tail grubs, and they were bright pink, and I put them on the back of a spinner bait or a spinner, something like that. And it was more of a joke. I was like, oh, this is funny. It's pink. It's like, I bought them for Andrew's brother. I'm like, oh, this is your favorite color, just kids being doofuses. And it turns out that pike loved pink and bass loved pink. So I started using them. So there's a long history of me using pink lures. So there are a few good reasons to use pink. And you may think it's not a natural color. Like we're always talking like green pumpkin. But usually we're saying with baits and lures to use something dark, something bright, and something natural. And pink would definitely be in that bright category. So number one, it's high visibility. It's a standout color. It's vibrant, highly visible in the water, which makes it stand out in like weeds. Like we're talking like green pumpkin kind of blends in with everything. But pink, obviously it's like bright neon pink. It really stands out. And you have to think underwater, you can see that thing sink deep, right? You can chuck it 50 feet away and see the thing quivering down. So you can see that good. The fish definitely can see it from a long distance. I've actually caught a lot of northern pike on the pink Senko over the year. That thing just quivering down. They like bright colors like white and pink. So it is high visibility. It does have a lot of contrast as well. And one thing that in this article that I looked at, they were talking about the aggressive appeal. And I never really overly thought about this, but the visual stimulus, the bright and unusual color of pink lures can create a sense of excitement for fish. So I've never really thought of this, but maybe a bright color, when you chuck it in, the fish is just like, wow, what's that? And then they just go and eat it. I don't know, maybe that's a thing. One day when we learn how to communicate with fish, we'll have to ask them. The other point is it is an effective lure color in low light conditions. I find that pink works really good when it's cloudy. When it's cloudy outside, that color just pops and the fish just somehow just love it. I've caught them all the time, but when it's usually sunny and clear, I like to use like a green pumpkin. But when it's cloudy outside or dark, pink it stands out a lot. It's kind of like neon underwater and the fish can just see it. And again, bass aren't overly intelligent. I feel like it looks good, it smells good, it's wiggling good. And even though it's pink and it's not like a natural thing, whatever, they'll still hit it.
Mm-hmm. And it's so cool to have like these random colors that are just effective that looks weird.
Yeah,
but yeah, it was cool like the history of us using it. But there is a scientific basis for having pink stuff. The next one we're going to talk about is his opinion on cotton cordell big O lures. And actually, I was just talking to my buddy Norm, and it's funny, he just messaged me during this podcast too, and I'm like, Norm, leave me alone. But so big O is like the classic square bill. I don't know if it's the original. I think it is, but it is. Yeah, it's such a good bait.
I think it is one of the originals. I remember reading an article about the original. They were carved out of wood, but I think it was one of the original square bills.
Yeah, and it was introduced in the 1960s, and it's one of cotton cordell's most famous and long-lasting products. Now, at the time, it was very like innovative. Like we think of crankbaits now as like, okay, it's crankbait. What's the difference to another crankbait? But have a square bill was huge. It was vastly different than other stuff at the time. And there's some good reasons as to why. So first of all, Jesse, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when fishing a square bill? What is its biggest advantage over any other crankbait?
I guess I should unmute. I think like square bills, like mostly when people are using them, they're like the 4x4 of fishing lures. They have 2 treble hooks, but because of their square bill, you can pretty much deflect them off everything. The way that the design of the bill is, when it hits a log, it doesn't dig into it. It like pops over the top and the hooks like go upwards. So you can literally cast them into a bunch of like logs and branches and reel it in. And despite having 2 treble hooks, like I said, they generally come out. And when you're deflecting off wood or like rocks or anything like that, it triggers fish to strike. So that's one of the advantages.
Yeah. Its wobble is a lot different than other crankbaits too, because some of them will have a kind of narrower wobble. But with the square bills, they kind of ride right up, and their whole bodies are really shaken side to side a lot. It's almost like they're pivoting the center of their body as they come along. It's really erratic for just a regular retrieval style bait.
Yeah. And they're easy to use, right?
Very.
Like a square bill is just like, if I was fishing with someone that's, new to fishing or a kid, and they were checking a lure, I'd be like, here, check this, reeled in. It's going to catch fish. So even on a straight retrieve, even if you're not deflecting off stuff, it's just a great lure to have. Actually, one of the first lures I ever bought was a Big O in the perch pattern. Yeah,
I had the brown craw, and I found it on the shore of Lake Simcoe one day, and I was like, this is the exact one I saw in a book. And then I bought some more later.
No, of course.
Another one that is actually a good feature of square bills is their increased durability. Because it's been more than a handful of times in my life when I've gone with a brand new crankbait and I cast out and it hit something and the bill just snaps off. Like, it's happened so many times. And I don't think I've ever snapped off a square bill, because they're usually built right into the bait. Like, it's one mold, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, cut a slit and glue it in after. So they are very durable for that, because they're designed to be bumping and cracking into all kinds of stuff underwater.
Yeah. I thought this was a good question from Wham Baits.
Yeah.
So Wes from Wham Baits asked us, and I cut out the other part of his question. He just said, what is one bait that you always have here? And then he says, basically, like, he knows that it's one of his baits, but we don't have to say that. That's a good question, though. And I'm going to use this for like bass fishing. I'd say there's one rod that I always have rigged up with, and it's obviously, like we talked, a stick bait. Like Wes from Wham Baits, like a woblin or just like a 5-inch stick bait. That's always rigged up on one of my spinning rods, because it's a good toss back bait. And it's a bait that gets bites in the worst of conditions. It may not be the bait that I'm always using, but I always have one tied on because it always catches fish.
Yeah, I agree. That's one. If he says baits, I guess it'd be primarily soft plastics he is talking about. So yeah, a stick bait of some sort. But a lure in recent years, it's always been a chatterbait, or a bladed jig. That's one thing. Pretty much any time of the year I can fish. I've even used it. I bring the small, like, micro chatterbaits, and I go ice fishing for perch as well. And I'll use them like ice fishing in the winter. So there's literally an application for those things year round.
Yeah. No, chatterbait would definitely be one of my options too.
MD83 Outdoors asks, what is live rubber skirting, and how does it compare to silicone skirting on jigs?
That's a good question.
Yeah, because you might think like, oh, it's just skirt to skirt. Like, it doesn't matter. I didn't know there was a difference at all. Living rubber skirts, there's some, again, pros and cons. So we're going to list some pros kind of briefly. I'll go over the living rubber, and then Jessica can go over the silicone kind of pros and cons of them as well. So for living rubber, very natural movement in water, especially in colder conditions. It stays a bit more limber. And then it's unique texture and bulk. So the rubber is usually thicker than silicone, and it has a unique texture that it just kind of has a bit more, like, again, billowy. It's softer. It has a bit more presence as it's moving through the water, or even just sitting there in the water. So the slower moving baits, it's a really good advantage oftentimes to have the rubber as opposed to silicone. And the durability over time, it does last longer. When it talks about like elasticity of it having movement, of it moving around, it won't like break off or snap or anything like that. And it doesn't get as brittle as quickly as silicone does. Like, you leave either one out in the sun for long periods, they'll both go bad. Yes, but living rubber on a day-to-day basis does handle the being exposed a little bit better than silicone. Unfortunately, some cons for it is there's not many color options that living rubber comes in right now. Silicone, they have like really cool patterns and whatnot, but it's usually just one solid color. And yes, it is longer lasting, but it is susceptible to drying out. So if it's not stored properly, it can dry out and crack. And the thing I'm always remembering is if you ever open an old tackle box and you find those like, it's like, oh, sweet, an old hula popper, and you pick it up and all the rubber skirt just like it crumbles off.
Yeah.
That's what'll happen to it when it gets dried out. It'll just disintegrate in your hand, unfortunately. So it does require a bit of maintenance to be able to make sure it's going to be stored properly.
Exactly. And then silicone skirts, that's generally what you see on most jigs and spinner baits and buzz baits now. And one of the cons of living rubber, because living rubber is literally like little individual strands and they're round. Silicone is flat. So they basically have it in sheets. Stuff can be printed on it, and then that is cut into little, strands. So they can print all kinds of cool designs and patterns, like, like scales and reflectiveness and holographic stuff. So there is a lot of colors that you can have. And I think that's why most people go with that. It's probably cheaper too. There are a bunch of companies that still use living rubber because of all those advantages that Andrew said. Like it's a great, has a lot of bulk, has a lot of movement. That's why they call it living rubber. It's like it's alive underwater, right? Mm-hmm. But silicone, it is easier to store than living rubber, obviously. And it's a little bit more consistent, I guess. I have a few baits that have living rubber skirts, and they are very like bulky and billowy. Mm-hmm. Now, if that's not what you're looking for, if you're not looking for like a big bulky bait and you want something more finesse, silicone is probably a little better because it's a little more thin. Like you go to the fishing store, there's a million jigs on the shelf. There's not a lot of living rubber ones. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of like looking online. I was like, okay, who has living rubber jigs, for instance, for bass fishing? And what I found is that brand Tungsten for Anglers. They have a tungsten, it's called a Tungsten Expert Rubber Jig, and it's about $10, but it is tied with living rubber. Never used it myself. Looks pretty good. And yeah, living rubber. Yeah, it is definitely cool, especially in like the fall or like early spring when the fish are more lethargic and they want to see that, they're really, looking at your bait, trying to see if it looks real. And you have this like, pulsing skirt under the water. It's not just like silicone that just like falls down. Like living rubber, it's almost like floats. It's pretty cool stuff. So,
but yeah, it actually, no, we covered it all.
Yay!
Woohoo! Tungsten for Anglers asked, Tungsten Expert Rubber Jig.
Oh, that's not a question.
That's not a question. I don't know why this is in here. Oh, it's just cluttered on my page. My goodness. All right, this guy, this is a cool dude. I went to school with this guy. This is JR Fishing Hunting. Yes, fall fishing when hunters are around. How close is too close? Now, as his name implies, he does both fishing and hunting. So, Jeff, I'm going to assume that you aren't the hunter in this scenario. Or if you are, I hope you listen to this ruling. Because you're supposed to be 500 meters of any dwelling, unless written permission is obtained from the owner when you are hunting. 500 meters from any public building. 30 meters of a right-of-way for public vehicular traffic or a sign posted or marked for recreational trail that is established and maintained by any organization for the general public. So, again, 500 meters from a building of any kind, pretty much, unless it's your own personal building, or you have received instruction, or 30 meters from any public travel area, so that it would include bodies of water, unless it's waterfowl hunting and stuff like that. But I'll say I've had, for that would pertain though, I believe, to canal systems and stuff like that for designated waterway paths. I don't know exactly, but that I think it would. I will say there was my dad and I were fishing one time, and we're hearing this guy shoot skeet off of their backyard over the lake up in Barry's Bay, and we're just getting pelted. Like it's raining lead onto us. And it's not like it's hard, like lead is hard, yes, but like they're firing up into the air, it loses all its forward momentum and it's just falling straight down. And it's not hurting us, but it's like, come on guys, like we're fishing this bay and you all come out and start shooting skeet and it's just littering, like raining all into our boat and stuff. Like they weren't being smart about it, let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I have a funny story. It has nothing to do with hunting, but I was fishing kayak fishing back in the day when I was still had a kayak. I was fishing in one of the Kawartha lakes quietly. It was early in the morning. I was paddling around, and this lady, I noticed she didn't see me because I was kind of in the shoreline. There's all these Canadian geese going up on her lawn. She comes out of her cottage, hair curlers in, robe, just out of bed. She comes out with a BB gun or a pellet gun or something, and she starts shooting these things, like literally to get them off her lawn. And she pinged the side of my canoe or kayak. A bunch of the balls hit the water, and then one smoked the front of my canoe. And I was like, "Yo!" I was like, "I'm right here," and she's like, "Oh!" She didn't know I was there, and she's like, "I'm so sorry." And then she just like ran inside. And that is how I almost died.
That's gonna be the title of the episode. How I almost died, featuring Jesse from AOA. It's not clickbaity at all.
Yeah. So I thought the last question here, someone asked, what are some cool, well, I guess they're not really cool, but what are some cool stuff that you're excited to use this year? There's lots of stuff. Like, again, we buy stuff all the time. Unfortunately, we have sale is like what, 5 minutes from your house, Andrew?
Yeah.
It's 5 minutes from my work. Gagnon Sports. We're always like, I drive out to Belleville soon. We're going to go to Pro Tackle there. We go to Tackle Bros.
I have friends up in
Peterborough
Innisfil. They're like
Tackle.
10 minutes away from the Cabela's up there.
Oh yeah, it's a serious addiction. So we buy all kinds of stuff, and there's lots of cool things that we're excited to use in the fall. But what's one thing this year, Andrew, that you kind of been waiting to use? Oh, you got a Bessie.
I got a loon Bessie, a floating one, and this is the Daiwa. It's kind of like a big spy bait, but this is the topwater model. Has a big blade on the bottom, much like a Nishini spy bait kind of thing. But this,
it is. It's just a large one, yeah.
And this
so
is
it's basically
the
a big
color.
musky lure, pretty much.
Yeah, that's the plan. And I wanted a good musky lure. I don't own a topwater in loon pattern. I know Jesse has a few. He always loves them. So I decided I'm going to get one of these in loon pattern. Plus, it's
fair. Yeah, those look pretty cool. I've seen some videos of guys.
So
They're
nice.
very, very disruptive. It's got a prop on the front, a prop on the back, a big blade wagging underneath. That's going to attract some fish. Very disruptive lure.
And it's a loon. The red eye, just like a loon, the crimson eye. And no other Bessie has the red eye.
That is very true. Speaking of musky lures, I actually just picked this up at Gagnon Sports today. I bought this. I'm a lot of guys like bucktails when they're musky fishing. I fish a lot of weedy lakes, so I've always kind of like been more of a big spinnerbait guy. I actually caught my biggest muskie so far this year on a big spinnerbait. But I picked up one of these blue water baits, spinner baits. This is a bit of a bigger bait. And again, it's fall. I'm trying to attract slightly bigger fish. This isn't a massive spinner bait, but this has a size 9 big, I don't know, it's not a Colorado blade, but some big blade on it. I think it's a 7 and a 9. That thing's going to thump. Look at the size of the hook on this. This is a gaff of a hook. I don't even know. It looks like it's like an 8 or 9-aught hook. But listen to that clack. Oh, yeah. But it's black tinsel with some gold in it. And it's got a big gold number 9 blade on the back. And if you don't know blade sizes, when you hear like people talking about bucktails, like, oh, it's a 8 or a 10, a 9 blade is a fair sized blade. It's going to thump in the water. It's made of heavy duty wire. I'm excited to fish that because I fish around a lot of weeds. Actually, this last weekend, we recorded this beforehand. So hopefully in the future, I caught a huge muskie last weekend. Hopefully. I can't say for sure because I'm not going to, be able to time travel, but I'm going to be using this last weekend, if that makes sense. So I'm excited to use that a bit. I have a lot of musky lures, but this is a lure I know that I can tie on and pretty much fish it the majority of the day because we do fish around a lot of weeds. And, this time of year, you get that cold front moving in, or not the cold front, but you got that cold temperature as fall's starting. And all those big muskie and pike are coming shallow to feed up for the fall. So I'm excited. I'm going to be pounding the shoreline. So remember I said Andrew has to fish the tube. So yes. Andrew has 2 rods. I said that we're going to weld his snap shut so he can't not fish a tube. He won't be able to take it off. So if he brings 2 rods, he can have that big topwater Bessie on 1 rod. The other rod is going to be a tube. And I'll tell you what, I'll be a nice guy. The other rod, I'm not going to weld it shut. You can change lures on that rod.
Oh, thank you, my gracious friend.
Yeah. And one more thing, me and Andrew both got this because this has interested me for a long time, is the new Daiwa X8 sinking braid. Now, for years, there's been sinking braid like in Japan. They're always ahead of us, right? And you always think like, why would you need a braid to sink? Well, braid floats naturally. So say you're fishing like a drop shot or a bait on the bottom and your lure is like say 20 feet down. And then you have this big amount of line that's kind of just floating or like suspending in the water almost.
Yeah, because braid does float.
Yeah, you don't have the best sensitive connection to your bait because your line isn't technically tight. So this new braid, it sinks. So again, I was not the first people to have sinking braid, but this is the first widely available sinking braid. You'll be able to buy this at any tackle shop, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I got 15 pound, and I'm actually going to use this in the fall for sure. This would be great for like pretty much. I wouldn't obviously use this for like topwater fishing because it sinks, but any like presentation where you're fishing on the bottom and you're looking for a sensitive, technique or presentation. I'm excited to try this. Like, I don't know, I've never used it before.
I'm really excited too because like I like fishing a lot of soft plastic weightless. Doesn't mean I want them all to float, but when I'm using like braid, which I often do, it's just it's even more holding it up. It sinks so slow sometimes. So having some line that'll do, help aid or won't prevent it from sinking at all is going to be awesome for like finesse jigs and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Ned rigs is going to be awesome. Like,
oh yeah. I've tried so many different brands of line and they all make good line.
Mm-hmm.
The last, I'd say 3-4 years, I've been using a lot of Daiwa line. I really like it. I actually like the X8 Garand. That stuff's really good. So I'm excited to try this. It's sinking. We'll post about what we think about it. Again, I have no clue. I'm thinking logically, it should be good for that, what we talked about, those techniques.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you have that on a reel, you have to remember that it sinks. And you can't just pick up finesse topwater and oh, why is this not working properly? Oh yeah, it's sinking line.
That's why you need multiple combos.
Yes. You're like, this is my sinking line rod, and this rod is a floating line rod. So we talked a bit about fluorocarbon, how it sinks, and I said, I like using fluorocarbon for some bottom techniques because it sinks, so it allows for a more sensitive feel. But if you don't need fluorocarbon because it's expensive, now you have a braided option. So I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm excited to try it. So we'll see.
One of the things I recently just picked up actually is another fillet knife. This is a Bubba. This is the 7-inch tapered flex, so it's not the ultra flex, which I found just for my personal preference was way too flexy for how I like to fillet fish. But this one is slightly thicker. It still has like lots of flex into the tip and stuff, but the majority of the blade is nice and rigid. The other one flexes all the way down to the handle. But the biggest reason why I really like the Bubba fillet knives,
the grip.
The grip is insane.
It's so comfy.
I can be handling pike with both hands. Pick this up and get solid. It's there. It's nice thumb indent. You got like a good finger grip up here.
Yeah,
they're so comfortable for that. So I'm excited for this one because this is like my go-to general purpose do everything fillet knife, and this is going to be the one that goes now with me all the time.
We're gonna have to do I think, Andrew, we should do a pike fishing trip in the fall, catch a bunch of pike, and use that knife.
Yeah, I want to do a video.
I always let Andrew buy the knives because he fillets all the fish anyway, so why should I have to buy the knife? Well, realistically, I should have to buy the knife if you do all the filleting, but whatever. I'll reimburse you later. I thought we could end this podcast with some interesting thing that I've never done before. We're going to use technology right now. We're going to use ChatGPT to tell us something that we really need to know. So I just started using ChatGPT for some of the scheduling work that I do at work. And you can it says, ask me anything. So I'm like, okay, how smart is this stupid thing? It's AI. It's artificial intelligence. So I said to ChatGPT, I said, give me 5 clever ways to leave work and go fishing without raising suspicion. So feel free to use any of these, but considering some weird robot wrote this for us, I doubt these will work. So it suggests number 1, to schedule a meeting. It says set up a calendar and block off an off-site client meeting or a personal development time, with remote work option becoming more option. Become a 2 to 3 hour meeting in your calendar while you sneak off for a quick fishing trip. So why don't me and Andrew use our jobs to say if these would work? So would that work for you? Scheduling a meeting? Do plumbers have meetings?
No, we have appointments, and if I don't get all mine done, I just keep working till they are all done. So it doesn't help me.
If I literally messaged my boss and said, I'm scheduling a meeting, he'd be like, for what? It's a handyman meeting. What can I say? Okay, that wouldn't work. Okay, option 2, it says ChatGPT says you can tell someone or your boss that you have to run errands. It says tell your boss or colleagues that you need to run important errands during lunch or right after work. Why would you do it after work? I want to go fishing during work.
Yeah.
It says keep your fishing gear in the car, and once you're free, head straight to your favorite fishing spot for a little angling before heading back to work.
That's not a tip. That's just how you do it. You keep your fishing gear with you, so as soon as you have time, you use it.
But could you tell someone you're running errands during work and go fishing? Could you possibly pull that off?
No, the trucks have GPS.
Oh, dang it. You know what? I could get away with that because no one's tracking me, baby. All right, number 3. Schedule a doctor's appointment, quote unquote doctor's appointment. It says, schedule a doctor's appointment or a checkup in the afternoon, preferably near a fishing spot. Okay, I think ChatGPT is missing it here. Why would I schedule something near a fishing spot if I'm not going to the doctor? Unless I need to bring back a doctor's note and go into the doctor and then afterwards go fishing, I would just say I'm going to the doctor, and my boss would be like, okay. I wouldn't need to prove that I was there. So I would just not have to schedule a near a fishing spot. But yeah, that could work. That could work for both of us. Why don't we do that tomorrow, Andrew?
Oh, you know what?
I think you need to get your something checked.
Yeah, my alignment to this synophilus is not doing too good for me right now. I'm going to get that reorganized by a professional.
Number 4, it says, ChatGPT says that you can tell your boss that you need to take advantage of a mental health awareness day. Would that work at your place? My boss would literally laugh at me if I did that.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you need to rest your little head and go fishing. It's like, yeah, man.
I would get some mental health issues if I tried to make that excuse, and I'd get ripped into so bad.
Yeah. And the last one it says is you can tell your boss you're going to work remotely for the day, possibly from a different, quieter location. And then it says in brackets, but really a fishing spot.
I do service work for plumbing, so everything I do is from a remote location, as in their location. I can't do plumbing Bluetooth style yet. It doesn't exist yet.
No. Well, and maybe in the future we'll have plumbing robots. So this is what ChatGPT says to conclude. It says, these strategies give you plausible reasons to step away from work and enjoy some time on the water without raising too many questions. A lot of people are like, man, AI is amazing. I'm still not on board with it. It's pretty dumb. But if any of these work for you, you should definitely try them.
Here's my recommendation, and this is what I do. I put a fishing rod in my work truck, and then after I'm done a job, I'll be like, I'm going to take my half-hour lunch break and stop at this creek side and take a few casts, and then I'm going to leave. And if my boss says anything, he just wants to see the photos of what I caught because he's into fishing too. But that's not it for everyone.
True. Anyway,
yeah,
this is a long episode, but I think it was worth it.
Yeah, I wish there were better excuses though to get out of work. I have the desire to leave work all the time and go fishing. I just don't. I also need the money to afford my expensive habit. I'm sure Jesse would agree, and I'm sure our listeners would agree.
I was going to say, if you're listening to this and you have a good excuse that you think would be slightly comedic or something that's actually worked for you, please message us on Patreon or on Instagram or on Facebook, and we'll read it on one of the next podcasts. So make sure you do that.
Absolutely. And before we end the podcast, we want to give a big thank you for everyone who is listening, who continues to listen. If you have the opportunity, tell a friend about us. Take your favorite episode and share it with them. Share them a link and say, hey, check this out. I think you'd like it. And then recommend that they also leave a review if they like it. And then if you haven't left one yet too, please do so. We have a lot of awesome listeners. Jesse mentioned it at the beginning of the part 1 of this episode last week, where we have listeners from around the world. And not everyone has left reviews yet, and we're a little disappointed. But it helps us out a lot, and it helps us get better giveaways for you guys, helps us get better guests, helps more people like yourselves find us, be able to help this podcast keep going and just get better content for you. So if you have the opportunity, we really appreciate it. Big thanks to everyone who is already a Patreon member. who are automatically entered into all those giveaways that we have. We're going to have some, the year's not over yet. We have more lined up. So don't get disheartened if you haven't won anything yet recently or yet at all this year. There are still more chances coming even this year in 2024. So don't be too concerned about if you haven't gotten anything good yet. Before we end, we have, as tradition states, the quote of the week. And to handle it is the man wearing a Garmin hat, Jesse.
Oh, yeah. I got a new hat. Anyway, the quote of the week this week
is that it? I got a new hat.
Yeah, that's the quote of the week. I got a new hat. No, the quote of the week is, if AI tells you to schedule a meeting, you're about to get a pretty bad beating from your boss. Just kidding.